The little town was always quiet early, as if it were falling asleep as the sun went down. It was a cold fall. Yellow leaves swirled in the air, carpeting the paths of the park across from my house with a golden carpet. 3 months. It had been exactly 3 months since Suellen had been gone. I'm still not used to waking up in an empty bed, making coffee for just one, and talking to myself instead of sharing my thoughts with her. At 73, alcohol doesn't bring the same pleasure as it used to, but it does help me forget for a while. The doorbell interrupted my musings. I wasn't expecting visitors. My former colleagues from the prosecutor's office came by less and less often, and my few friends had long since moved to Florida to warm their old bones in the sun. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling my knees aching. Another reminder of age. Opening the door, I saw my daughter Gina. She stood on the doorstep, tall, slender, with her blonde hair in an elegant bun. An exact replica of Suellen when she was young, but with a cold glint in her eyes that my wife never had. "Daddy?" She leaned over and pecked my cheek. Her perfume was too pungent, not like the delicate scents Suellen favored. "I thought I'd come by and check on you. How are you doing?" I hummed, letting her in the house. This was the first time Gina had decided to check in on me in over a month. She used to call once a week, but since we'd buried Suellen, her concern for my well-being had increased. "Alive as you can see," I replied, limping after her into the living room. "I'm surprised to see you. I thought you had a gallery show this week." Gina took off her coat and hung it carefully on the coat rack before answering. "It ended yesterday. Quite successful, by the way. Sold a few pieces by Nash Parker, that abstractionist I told you about." "Oh, the one who paints blots for a lot of money?" I couldn't resist a barb. Modern art always seemed to me a mockery of common sense. Gina tightened her lips but held back. She knew it was useless to argue with me. Over the years as a prosecutor, I had developed the habit of defending my point of view to the last. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, heading for the kitchen. "Wine would be better, if you have any," she replied, following me. Gina surveyed the kitchen with a critical eye. I knew she was noticing the unwashed dishes in the sink and the layer of dust on the windowsill. Suellen always kept the house in impeccable order, and I had other priorities. "You've got it all old," she said, disapproval in her voice. "What did you expect? That I'd turn the house into a trendy studio like your gallery?" I pulled out a bottle of red wine that Suellen kept for special occasions. "Your mother loved this house just the way it is, and so did I." Gina took the glass I held out to her and took a small sip. "Ah, I was just thinking maybe you should hire an au pair, or maybe think about a nursing home. Sunny Hills has a great reputation, and—" "I'm not going into a nursing home," I interrupted her sharply. "I'm doing just fine on my own." She held up her hands in a conciliatory gesture. Okay, just a suggestion." We moved into the living room, and I noticed her gaze lingering on the photographs on the mantelpiece. A wedding picture of Suellen and me, young and hopeful. A birth photo of Gina and her little brother Boyd. A family portrait taken on my 60th birthday. "How's Boyd?" she asked with feigned indifference. I hadn't seen him in a while. "The same," I said, settling into the chair. "Last call was 2 weeks ago. He was complaining that business wasn't going well." Gina snorted. "No wonder. Who needs taxidermy in this town? It's a relic of the past." "Your brother's doing what he likes," I sighed, feeling the need to once again stand up for my son. Not everyone has the talent to sell blotches for thousands of dollars. Irritation flashed across Gina's face, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Dad, I didn't come here to argue with you about Boyd or art. I'm worried about you. It's been 3 months and you're still in mourning." I looked at my clothes, black pants, and a dark blue shirt. Not exactly mourning, but Gina always liked to exaggerate. "I wear what I'm comfortable in. What's your point?" She took another sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "Dad, we need to talk about practical things. Mom wouldn't want you living in the past forever. We need to move on, get your affairs in order, get all the paperwork." That's it, the true purpose of her visit. Not concern for my well-being, but interest in the inheritance. I felt a muffled irritation rising inside. "What exactly are the documents you're interested in, Gina?" She pretended to be surprised. "I mean all the necessary formalities after the death of a loved one. Bank accounts, insurance, Mom's pension. It's all taken care of. I interrupted her. I was a prosecutor for 42 years, remember? I know how the law works. Gina set her glass down on the coffee table and stepped forward. What about the will? Mom told me she made one 5 years ago, when she was diagnosed with her first heart problems. I looked at my daughter carefully. Sue Ellen had indeed mentioned a will, but I had never seen the document, until recently. Your mother left an envelope, I said slowly, watching Gina's reaction, with instructions to open it only after her death. Gina's eyes lit up, but she tried to hide her interest. And you opened it? I shook my head. Not yet. Why not? She sounded genuinely puzzled. It's been 3 months. I shrugged my shoulders, pretending not to be moved by her impatience. Not ready. This is the last message from Sulan. When I open it, she'll be gone for good. Gina rolled her eyes, not trying to hide her irritation. Dad, this is irrational. Mom's already gone, and this is just a document to read and fulfill her last will. I'll decide when to open it, I said firmly. And you don't get to tell me what's rational and what's not. She stood up and started pacing the room, tapping her heels nervously on the parquet. You always do this, making decisions for everyone without consulting anyone. That's why Boyd's always rebelling and I'm... What about you, Gina? I interrupted her. You come once a month with routine questions about my health, and all you really care about is the contents of the envelope. Her face flashed. It's not fair. I care about you. You do? I grinned bitterly. Then why didn't you come to help when Sue Ellen had her last attack? Why didn't you sit with her in the hospital? It was all on me, the nursing, the talking to the doctors, the sleepless nights at her bedside. Gina turned away, avoiding my gaze. I had an important exhibition, and besides, I didn't know it was so serious this time. Of course, I replied wryly. Your paintings were always more important than your family. For a moment, there was a heavy silence in the room. I knew I'd overreacted, but I couldn't stop. All the bitterness of the last few months, all the loneliness and pain, came rushing out. You know what? Gina finally said, her voice sounding unaccustomed to restraint. I know this is hard for you. You lost your wife of almost half a century, but don't think you're the only one hurting. She was my mother, and I'm grieving in my own way. Something in her tone made me look at her with different eyes. Behind the mask of a businesslike, successful woman, I saw for a moment the little girl who had once sat on my lap and asked me to read her a bedtime story. I sighed. I'm sorry. That was rude. Gina nodded, accepting the apology, but the tension between us didn't go away. So what's up with the envelope? She asked, returning to the interrupted conversation. Where is it? In a safe place, I answered evasively. Actually, the envelope was in my office, in the top drawer of my desk, under a stack of papers. But I wasn't going to share that information with my daughter. And when do you plan to open it? When I'm ready, I repeated. Maybe in a week, maybe a month. That's my business. Gina began to show signs of impatience again. Dad, but there could be something important in there. Something that needs to be done within a certain time frame. I shook my head. If there was something urgent, Sue Ellen would have told me about it. She was a practical woman. Yes, but... Gina stopped half speaking, clearly fighting the urge to say what she was thinking. But what? I nudged her. She sighed. But Mom didn't always share her plans. Not even with you. It was true, and an unpleasant feeling prickled me. Throughout our years of marriage, Sulan and I had our own secrets from each other. Nothing major, just little secrets that everyone has. But in recent years, I'd occasionally caught her keeping certain things quiet. Phone conversations that she would interrupt when I entered the room. Letters that she would quickly tuck away in a drawer. I never asked her about these things. I respected her right to privacy. Now these little things took on a new meaning. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Gina paused as if deciding whether to continue. Shortly before the end, my mom called me. She wanted to talk about something important, but said she had to discuss it with you first. We agreed to meet in a week, but she didn't finish the sentence. But a week later, Sulan was gone. The last heart attack came suddenly, in the night. I woke up to her wheezing and called an ambulance, but it was too late. She died on the way to the hospital without regaining consciousness. What did she want to talk about? I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Gina shook her head. I don't know. She just said it was about our family and that it was important. I thought maybe it had something to do with the will. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about what she said. What was Sue Ellen going to tell her daughter? And why hadn't she talked to me first? Like she'd promised Gina she would. Anyway, Gina continued, I think we should open the envelope as soon as possible. For Mom's sake, to fulfill her last wish. I looked at my watch. It was almost 9 o'clock. Gina was clearly not going to leave without an answer. Okay, I said at last. I'll think about it. Maybe this weekend. She nodded, not hiding her relief. I can come over on Saturday. We can help each other work it out. I said I'd think about it, I clarified. I didn't promise I'd open the envelope in front of you. Gina pressed her lips together, but she didn't argue. As you wish. But keep in mind that this isn't just about you. It concerns the whole family. I remember, I said dryly. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest. It had been a long day. It was a transparent hint at the end of the visit, and Gina understood it. She finished her wine in one gulp and stood up. Surely no one. All right, I'll go, but call me when you decide to open the envelope. Please. I nodded, not making a promise I wasn't sure I'd keep. After walking my daughter to the door, I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the hushed noise of her car. Then I walked slowly into my office and opened the top drawer of my desk. The envelope was where I'd left it, a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written in Sue Ellen's neat handwriting. I ran my fingers over the inscription, feeling my heart clench with pain and longing. What was it you wanted to tell me, my dear? What secret did you take with you? Perhaps Gina was right, and it was time to open the envelope. But some part of me was afraid of what I might find there. 47 years of marriage is a lifetime of love, arguments, compromises, and secrets. Was I ready to learn Sue Ellen's last secret? I put the envelope back in the drawer and closed it. Not yet, not today. Maybe tomorrow or a week from now, when the pain subsides a little and I can stare at her handwriting without feeling my heart break. Back in the living room, I poured myself another whiskey and sat by the fireplace. The house seemed especially empty and quiet after Gina left. Only the ticking of the old clock broke the stillness, counting down the seconds of life without Sue Ellen. The old wall clock in the living room struck 7 in the evening. Its sound echoed through the half-empty house, reminding me of how much Sue Ellen loved that clock. They're like the heart of the house, Vance, she used to say. Now that heart was beating for me alone. Twilight had already enveloped Batesville in its gray blanket. From my office window, I watched the last passers-by hurrying home. The little town was always quiet early, as if it were falling asleep as the sun went down. It was a cold fall. Yellow leaves swirled in the air, carpeting the paths of the park across from my house with a golden carpet. 3 months. It had been exactly 3 months since Sue Ellen had been gone. I still hadn't gotten used to waking up in an empty bed, making coffee for just one, and talking to myself instead of sharing my thoughts with her. The envelope looked the same as it always did. Heavy cream paper, my name written in Sue Ellen's hand. I ran my fingers over the writing, trying to feel my wife's presence through that ink. Silly, of course. But when you've lived with a person for almost half a century, any little thing connected with them becomes a sacred relic. I opened the envelope with an old bronze letter opener, another gift Sue Ellen had given me for my 20th wedding anniversary. Inside were several folded sheets of paper. I carefully pulled them out and spread them out on the table. The first was a plain white sheet with printed text to the official will, signed by Sue Ellen and a notary public. I set it aside, deciding to read the second document first, a handwritten letter on several pages of notebook paper. Sue Ellen's handwriting, usually neat and even, here seemed nervous and hurried, as if she were writing in great excitement. My dear Vance, began the letter, if you are reading these lines, it means that I am no longer with you. I hope you will not blame me for not having had the courage to tell you everything in my lifetime. Some secrets are too hard to say out loud, especially when you're afraid of losing the love and respect of the person you care about most. I took a sip of my cooled coffee, feeling my heart start to beat faster. What is she talking about? What secrets? In 47 years of marriage, we'd had virtually no secrets from each other. At least that's what I thought. I have to start at the beginning, Sue Ellen continued. Before I met you, I had a different life that you know next to nothing about. I wasn't born in Ohio, as I told you, but in New Jersey. My father wasn't a humble accountant. He was a crook who ran financial scams. We moved constantly, hiding from the law and the angry victims of his machinations. I set the letter aside and stood up, trying to comprehend what I'd read. Sue Ellen had always talked about her happy childhood in a small town in Ohio, her strict but loving parents, her older brother killed in a car accident. Was it all a lie? At 16, I ran away from home, unable to stand my father's control and his criminal adventures. At 18, I met a man named Robert Kinnard. He was 15 years older than me. We dated for about a year, and I thought he was my chance at a normal life. But when I got pregnant, Robert said he was already married and couldn't leave his family. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sulin was pregnant? Before we met? She'd never mentioned it. On December 8th, 1969, I had a daughter. I named her Hope, because she was my only ray of light in that darkness. A daughter. Sue Ellen had a daughter, older than Gina and Boyd, a child I hadn't known existed all these years. When Hope turned 2, I got sick, severe pneumonia. Social services took Hope into foster care while I was treated, and when I finally got out of the hospital, it turned out she was adopted. I paused reading, feeling a lump rise to my throat. Poor Sue Ellen, what pain she had to go through alone. I fought Vance, got a lawyer, tried to get my daughter back through the courts, but the judge sided with the foster parents, thinking the girl would be better off with them. The only thing I got was the right to one visitation a year, provided I didn't try to make constant contact or reveal that I was her biological mother. And then I met you, Vance. You were so confident, strong, principled, a young assistant district attorney with a bright future. You saw me as a decent girl from a good family, and I didn't have the courage to tell you the truth. I was afraid you'd turn your back on me when you found out about my background, about my adopted child. I remembered what I had been like as a young man, tough, uncompromising, with clear ideas about right and wrong. How I had been scornful of people who broke the law. How I once told her I didn't understand women who refused to give up their children, calling them heartless, selfish women. I didn't know then the wound my words were inflicting. When Hope turned 8, her adoptive parents moved to Europe. My annual visits stopped. I lost contact with my daughter and for years knew nothing about her. I remembered that around this time, Sulin had become more withdrawn, often crying for no apparent reason. I put it down to hormonal changes, to fatigue from raising 2 small children. I never guessed the real reason for her sadness. And then 3 years ago, something unexpected happened. I got a letter from Hope. She'd grown up, graduated from college, gotten married. Her adoptive mother died of cancer, and before she died, she told her about me. Not everything, but enough for Hope to find me. Last year we met, secretly, during that trip I took to see an old friend in Chicago. We talked for days on end. She doesn't hold a grudge against me, Vance. I remembered that trip vividly. Sullen came back refreshed, rejuvenated, with a kind of inner light in her eyes. I joked at the time that the trip had done her more good than any medication for her ailing heart. I was going to tell you everything, Vance. Hope really wanted to meet you. But then that attack happened and the last lines were written in very faint, barely legible handwriting. Forgive me, Vance. In the envelope, you'll find my official will and Hope's address. Please contact her. She's a good girl. I hope you two will find common ground. Don't say anything to Gina and Boyd yet. Give them time to get used to the idea. I trust in your wisdom and tact. Always yours, Sue Ellen. I picked up the official will and ran my eyes over the legal text. Most of Sue Ellen's inheritance was divided equally between Gina, Boyd, and Hope. But there was one interesting detail. There was a separate clause for $100,000 in a bank account in Pittsburgh. This money was intended solely for Hope, as compensation for the years of separation. Where did Sue Ellen get such savings? I knew about her small inheritance from her aunt, a few lucky investments, but $100,000? That was a substantial sum she'd never mentioned. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my reverie. I quickly put all the documents back in the envelope and went to open it. On the doorstep stood my son, Boyd, a tall, thin man with dark hair beginning to thin and deep wrinkles around his mouth. Hi, Dad. He tried to smile, but it came out strained. Can I come in? I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. I didn't expect to see you, I said, closing the door. What's wrong? Boyd ran a hand through his hair, shaking off the raindrops. Nothing much. Just thought I'd pay the old man a visit. Do I need an excuse to visit my own father? There was a feigned nonchalance in his voice that I knew well. Boyd always said that when he was going to ask for money. I pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. I poured one for my son, but I didn't pour one for myself. Blood pressure pills and alcohol don't mix. Boyd downed half of it right away. How you doing out here, Pop? Alone in this big house? I shrugged my shoulders. It's all right. It's not the first time I've lived alone. How are you doing? How's work? Boyd fidgeted in his chair, clearly not wanting to talk about it. And, you know the usual. It's the off-season for taxidermy. Hunting's closed until the fall, so there's not a lot of orders. He finished his whiskey and added with visible relief, Actually, Dad, I'm having a little financial trouble. Nothing serious, just a temporary cash gap. The rent for the workshop has been raised, and then there are taxes. How much? I interrupted him. Boyd looked at me with feigned surprise. What? How much money do you need? 3,000, 3.5 tops. I'll pay you back as soon as the season starts. I sighed. Boyd had promised to pay me back so many times I'd stopped believing in those promises a long time ago. But he was my son, and I couldn't say no to him, despite his shortcomings. All right, I'll transfer it to your account. Boyd's face brightened. Thanks, Dad. You're a real lifesaver. What are those papers on your desk? He suddenly asked, nodding toward the office where I'd forgotten to close the door. Are you working on something? I tensed. Sulan's envelope was still on the desk. Nothing in particular, just sorting through some old papers. Boyd stood up and walked toward the office. Maybe I should help. 4 hands will get the job done faster. No need, I said sharply, blocking his path. I'll take care of it myself. Boyd stopped, looking at me in surprise. Whoa, Dad, what are you doing? I was just trying to help. I'm sorry, I tried to soften my tone. It's just some personal papers in there. I don't like people poking around in them. My son squinted at me, a look of suspicion in his eyes. These are Mom's things, aren't they? Did you find her will? I felt my heart start to beat faster. How did Boyd know about the will? Where did you get that from? He shrugged, but his eyes betrayed his interest. Gina called, said she came to see you the other day, and you were talking about some envelope Mom left. Sure. Gina. I should have known she wouldn't hold back and let her brother in on our conversation. Yes, I admitted reluctantly. Your mother left some papers. What's in them? Boyd stepped forward, curious. She left a will? Orders about the house? Her things? I looked at my son and saw in his eyes not grief for his mother, but greedy interest in a possible inheritance. It was painful and unpleasant. I don't know yet, I lied. I hadn't had time to read it. Boyd snorted incredulously. Come on, Dad. 3 months have passed and you haven't had time to open the envelope? That's right, I said firmly, and it's not up to you to decide when I should do it. My son raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. All right, don't be mad. It's just weird. Mom's always been so practical. She wouldn't just leave some paperwork out without telling me. Gina thinks you're stalling on purpose, that there might be something in those papers you don't want to show us. Gina thinks too much, I said dryly, and so do you. When the time comes, I'll tell you everything. Boyd finished his whiskey and set the glass on the table with excessive force. Son. You know, Dad, sometimes I think you still see us as kids. I'm almost 50. I'm a grown man. And Gina's a grown man too. We have a right to know what our mother left us. I felt the irritation rising inside. And I have a right to personal space and time to grieve. If she left me an envelope with instructions to open it after her death, then it was something personal, meant only for me. If it's just personal messages, why don't you want to show us? Boyd wouldn't stop. What's so secret about it? I rubbed my eyes tiredly. How could I explain to my son that this envelope contained a secret that could turn our family history upside down? That he had a sister he didn't know he had? That his mother, whom he thought the epitome of virtue and honesty, had spent her life hiding her past? Boyd, I said slowly, trying to speak calmly, I promise I'll explain everything soon, both to you and to Gina. But first, I have some things I need to deal with myself. My son looked at me with disbelief. What things, Dad? What could be so complicated about Mom's will? It's not just the will, I blurted out. There's other stuff in there. Personal. Boyd squinted. Love letters from another man? A secret Swiss bank account? What could be so mysterious about the life of a Batesville housewife? His dismissive tone hit a nerve. Your mother wasn't just a housewife, I said sharply. She was a complex, deep person with a rich inner world. And yes, she had her secrets. Which, of course, you've known all 47 years of marriage, Boyd said sarcastically. I felt the color of shame flood my face. No, I didn't. I'd lived with that woman for almost half a century, and I didn't know the most important thing about her. I'll stop by the other day. Boyd picked up his jacket and headed for the exit. Maybe by then you'll think you're old enough to be trusted with family secrets. It had been a week since I'd opened Sue Ellen's envelope and learned of Hope's existence. 7 days in which I'd tried to make sense of the news and decide how to proceed. I had picked up the phone several times to call the number on the letter, but each time I put it off. What would I say to this woman who was and was not part of our family at the same time? The ringing of the phone interrupted my musings. My daughter's name popped up on the screen. Yes, Gina, I answered, trying to make my voice sound normal. Daddy, did you open the envelope? She asked without preamble. I sighed. No hello or how are you, just to the point. Good morning to you too, daughter. I'm sorry, there was no remorse in her voice. It's just that Boyd said he stopped by the other day and you were talking about Mom's papers. He thinks you're hiding something. So they've already discussed me, colluding behind my back like schoolboys plotting mischief. I'm not hiding anything, Gina, I replied, feeling my irritation growing. It's just that some things take time. What things, Dad? There was impatience in her voice. What's so complicated about a will? It's just a formality. I paused, searching for words. It's not just a formality, Gina. There's things in there that neither you nor Boyd know about, and I need time to figure out the best way to tell you about it. What are you talking about? What's out there that we don't know? Let's talk about it when we meet. I tried to remedy the situation. Now is not a good time. No, Gina said firmly. If there's something in there about Boyd and me, we have a right to know. I'll be there in an hour, and I'll call Boyd and tell him to come too. Without waiting for my consent, she hung up. I slowly put the phone down on the table, feeling a chill run down my spine. This was the moment of truth, for which I was completely unprepared. I went up to the office and took the envelope with the will out of the safe. It was the original, which I had kept in a safe place. But during that week, I had made several copies of Sue Ellen's letters and had reread them often. Those copies were now on my desk, along with the yellowed letters that Sue Ellen had written to me in the early years of our acquaintance. The hour passed quickly. The doorbell rang, taking me by surprise. Gina was there, and behind her, I saw Boyd's car parked at the curb. So they'd agreed to come together, joining forces against a common enemy, me. Dad, Gina walked past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. Boyd and I have discussed the situation, and we've decided it's time to stop playing games. We need to know what's in Mom's will. Boyd came in next, nodding at me instead of greeting me. His face expressed determination mixed with ill-concealed impatience. I closed the door and turned to the kids. These aren't games, Gina, and you shouldn't have called a meeting like this without warning. How could you not? Boyd intervened. You've been playing us for a week. Since I've been here, you haven't answered your phone. You've been avoiding conversation. What are we supposed to think? I looked at my son, then at my daughter. Both looked annoyed. Both were sure they were right. I suddenly felt very old and very tired. Okay, I said, pointing to the living room. Let's talk. But first tell me honestly, are you really interested in the contents of the will or only in what you can get? Gina raised her head indignantly. What kind of question is that, Dad? Of course we're interested in Mom's last will and testament. Yeah, Boyd backed her up, but his eyes avoided my gaze. It ain't about the money. It's about Mom. I nodded, not believing a word they said. Over the past few years, I'd seen how distant they'd become from Sue Ellen, how rarely they'd called, how reluctant to visit. It was only when her health had taken a sharp turn for the worse that they'd been more attentive. "Have a seat," I pointed to the couch. "I'll bring the documents now." I went up to the study and took from the table copies of the letters I had reread in the morning. I decided not to show the original of the will. I needed to prepare them for the news about Hope first. When I returned to the living room, I found Gina and Boyd in the middle of a quiet but fierce argument. "And I say you're pushing too hard," Boyd hissed. "I should have given him time." "Time?" Gina snapped at him. "3 more months or a year, and then it would turn out that everything had already been worked out in our favor." They stopped talking when they saw me. I sat down in the chair across from them, putting the papers on the coffee table. "Before we begin," I said, "I want you to understand that what I'm about to tell you may change the way you think about Mom and our family." "What are you talking about, Daddy?" Gina asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice for the first time today. I took a deep breath. "Your mother, she had a daughter before she met me, a child neither of us knew about." The silence that followed my words was deafening. Gina froze with her mouth open, and Boyd grinned nervously, as if expecting me to say it was a joke. "What the hell is this?" He finally let it out. "Mom couldn't have. There must be some mistake." "It's not a mistake," I shook my head. "Her name is Hope. She's about 55 years old now. She's a doctor, lives in the suburbs of Boston. She has 2 sons. Gina was the first to come to her senses. Wait. You're telling me Mom had a kid before you? And she's never, not once in all these years, mentioned it. How is that possible?" "She was afraid," I answered simply. "Afraid we judge her. That my voice trembled, that I wouldn't understand and would turn my back on her. She gave the baby up for adoption when she was very young herself." Boyd jumped up from the couch, his face reddening. "Bullshit. Mom would never abandon her child, and she certainly wouldn't keep it from us." "You're making something up, Dad." "Why would I make something like that up?" I looked up at him tiredly. "It's the truth, Boyd. The bitter truth that your mother would have taken to her grave if she hadn't decided at the last minute to reveal her secret." Gina grabbed the papers off the table. "Is it in here? In these?" he asked hoarsely. "Was she mentioned in the will?" "Here it is." Despite the shock of the news, my first question was about the inheritance. "Yes," I answered in a steady voice. "Hope gets an equal share with you, plus the separate amount your mother had been saving for her for years." Boyd's face twisted with rage. "What? Some stranger gets a third of Mom's inheritance? Just because they share blood? What about us? Us who? She's nobody. I've never even met her." Gina put her hand on his shoulder, trying to reassure him. "Boyd, wait. Let me get this straight. Daddy, have you had any contact with this Hope?" "Hope?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "You did the right thing," Gina nodded. "We need time to think things through, and maybe check it out. No one knows if this Hope is real or just some con artist who took advantage of a sick woman's gullibility." I didn't expect such a reaction from my daughter. There was a professional, cold note in her voice, as if she was already calculating how to contest the will. "Your mother was sane until her last day," I said firmly. "And Hope wasn't a con artist. Sulin met her, they corresponded. I have pictures." "Let me see them," Gina demanded. I stood up and went to the office to get the rest of the documents, feeling the tension building. This conversation wasn't taking the turn I'd hoped for. While I was in the office, loud voices came from the living room. Gina and Boyd were arguing again. I slowed my step, listening. "We've got to move faster," Boyd insisted, "before he gets involved with that woman." "Huh, what do you suggest?" Gina hissed. "Challenge the will? On what grounds?" "I don't care." Boyd's voice shook with rage. "I'm not gonna let some imposter take what's ours. We're her real family, not this foundling." I returned to the living room with Hope's picture and a copy of the will. Gina and Boyd were instantly silent when they saw me. "Here." I put the picture on the table. "It's Hope and her sons. It was taken about a year ago, when your mother met her in Chicago." Gina took the photograph, scrutinizing it. Her fingers trembled slightly. "She looks like Mom. she admitted reluctantly. Same eyes. Boyd snatched the picture, looked at it, and tossed it back on the table. Nothing like that. It's an ordinary face. Like millions of them. Boyd, I looked at my son warningly. I realize this is a shock to you. For both of you. But let's talk about this calmly. Calmly, Boyd was almost shouting. You expect us to be calm when we find out our whole family history is a lie? That Mama had a secret daughter she didn't see fit to tell us about? That this stranger is now claiming your share of the inheritance? I finished for him. Now that's what really bothers you, isn't it? Boyd grabbed the papers off the table. What's this? More secrets? They're copies of your mother's letters, I answered, trying to take the papers from him. And the originals of her old letters to me. Personal effects, Boyd. Put that down, please. But he was already looking through the papers, his eyes running rapidly over the lines. My dear Vance, if you are reading these lines, he began aloud, wryly imitating a woman's voice, I hope you won't blame me. You bet. How could anyone blame St. Sulan? Boyd! I tried to snatch the letters from his hands, but he backed away, continuing to read. Before I met you, I had a different life. He jumped from place to place, picking out sentences. My father was a crook. That's news. At 18, I met a man. That's enough. I snatched the papers out of his hands. This is your mother's private letter to me. You have no right to read it aloud, and you have no right to keep the truth from us, Boyd shouted. We have a right to know who our mother really was. Gina, calmer than Boyd, came to me. Dad, don't get us wrong. We loved Mom, but the fact that she kept something so important from us, it hurt. And the fact that she left money to a stranger instead of helping her kids, that hurts too. You're not poor, Gina, I replied tiredly. You have a successful gallery. Boyd has his own studio. And Hope is not a stranger. She's just as much Sue Ellen's daughter as you are. No, Boyd flared up again. She's not our family. She was never part of our family. He snatched the stack of papers out of my hands and, before I could react, rushed to the fireplace, where the embers of the morning fire were smoldering. Boyd, don't you dare! I lunged for him, but it was too late. He tossed the papers into the fire, and watching the flames licking the letters, exclaimed with cruel triumph, You don't want to share. Enjoy the ashes. His face contorted into a gloating smile as he turned to me. That's it. No proof, no will. Now this Hope will get nothing. I watched the papers burn, copies of Sue Ellen's letters, her old messages to me, our love story turning to ash. I could have told him that the original will was in a safe place, that the notary had copies of those documents, that his prank wouldn't change anything. But in that moment, I just looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Who was this angry, greedy man with a face contorted with hatred? Was this really my Boyd, the boy I taught to ride his bike? The boy I read bedtime stories to? Gina seemed shocked by her brother's act, too. She backed toward the door, her face pale. Boyd, what have you done? This is crazy. But Boyd grinned, looking at the burning papers. No, it's justice. I protected our inheritance. Our legal right. I sank slowly into the chair, feeling my strength leave me. At that moment, I understood Sue Ellen more than ever. Her fear, her reluctance to reveal the truth. She knew our children better than I did, knew they wouldn't accept her secret, wouldn't forgive her past. Boyd stood over the fireplace, watching the last scraps of paper turn to black ash. He had a gloating smile on his face, but there was something else in his eyes. Fear, doubt, the realization that he had crossed a line. He didn't realize he'd burned the wrong documents, that the real will was still intact, that what he'd done hadn't changed anything. Nothing except the way I felt about him. After Boyd burned the papers, there was a heavy silence in the room. I stared at the letters burning in the fireplace, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me, mixed with deep disappointment. My son stood over the hearth with a triumphant expression on his face, as if he had just performed some heroic deed rather than an act of senseless vandalism. Gina froze at the door, her face a mixture of shock and confusion. She hadn't expected her brother to be so impulsive. Boyd, she said quietly, do you realize what you've just done? Those are Dad's papers, Mom's private letters. I did what I had to do, he said, turning to me. Now that imposter gets nothing. No inheritance, no mom's money. I rose slowly from my chair, surprised at my own calmness. Perhaps I had gotten used to hiding my emotions during my years as a prosecutor, especially when I needed to buy time and assess the situation. But now I had the opportunity to see the true intentions of my children. "You're right, Boyd," I said, keeping my thoughts to myself. "You just destroyed your mother's last will and testament." Boyd's face twitched for a moment, but he quickly pulled himself together. "There was no last will, just some fiction about this hope. Mom would never—" "You didn't even bother to read the whole thing," I interrupted him. "You just burned it, because you're afraid of the truth, because you're only interested in the inheritance, not the memory of your mother." Gina stepped closer, her businesslike grip taking over the initial shock. "Dad, don't be so dramatic. They were only copies, weren't they? You must have the original will. And at the notary's office, too." I looked at my daughter carefully, noting how quickly her thoughts returned to practical matters. The decision came instantly. I wouldn't tell them the truth. Let them think Boyd had really destroyed the original will. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go in their greed. "They weren't copies, Gina," I lied, watching their reaction. "It was Sue Ellen's original letter, and the original will she left me. I hadn't had time to take it to the notary yet." Gina's face stretched with horror. "What? No way! You kept the original will at home? On your desk? No copies? No notarization?" "I was too shocked by its contents to think about formalities," I replied, adding a note of weariness and humility to my voice. "I wanted to talk to both of you first." Boyd shifted his gaze from me to Gina and back again, beginning to realize the possible consequences of his action. "What's going to happen now?" he asked uncertainly. "Since there's no will, the inheritance will be distributed according to the law, right?" "I guess so," I shrugged. "Though now we have no proof that Hope is really Sue Ellen's daughter. Without that, she wouldn't be able to claim anything." I watched the relief on my children's faces. They didn't even try to hide it. Not a word of regret for their mother's lost letter. Not a hint of remorse, just calculation and cold interest in the material side of the matter. "So we'll get everything." Boyd wasn't asking a question, he was asserting, and there was an undisguised satisfaction in his voice. "Not necessarily," I answered, trying to complicate the game a little. Sullen had mentioned in her letter a bank account in Pittsburgh, a large sum of money intended for Hope. The bank might have a copy of her orders regarding that money. Gina frowned, her business acumen showing again. What bank? What account? Do you have that information?" "It was in those papers Boyd had so recklessly burned," I answered, looking at my son. Boyd ran a hand through his hair nervously. "I didn't realize that. I thought it was just—" "You weren't thinking at all," I cut him off. "You acted on impulse like you always do. And now we're all dealing with the consequences." Gina, more focused than her brother, was already thinking of next steps. "We can check every bank in Pittsburgh, and we should contact my mom's notary. He might have some information." "Good idea," I nodded. "Do what you think is right. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to be alone. It's been hard." Boyd looked confused, as if he were just now beginning to realize the enormity of what he'd done. "Dad, I didn't mean— I was just angry. This news about the sister we didn't know anything about. Mom's will. It's too much." "I understand," I said, though I didn't really understand and couldn't forgive. "But what's done is done. Now we have to live with it somehow." Gina came over and hugged me awkwardly, clearly trying to smooth things over. "We'll figure it out, Dad. Everything's going to be okay." I nodded, not trusting my voice. A few minutes later, they left. Gina took the still confused Boyd away, promising to come back tomorrow to discuss the next steps. As soon as the door closed behind them, I went up to the office and pulled the original copy of Sue Ellen's will out of the safe. What Boyd had burned were really just copies and old letters, but it pained me to see how easily my son had destroyed those memories. How quickly both Boyd and Gina had moved on to the question of money without even trying to comprehend the startling news that there was another of Sue Ellen's children. I sat down at the table and took a long look at my wife's signature on the last page of the will. Sullen had always been more perceptive about our children than I was. She saw their flaws that I refused to recognize. Boyd's greed, Gina's calculating nature. Maybe that's why she'd kept the truth about Hope hidden for so long. The next day, as promised, Gina called early in the morning. "Daddy, Boyd and I want to stop by. We need to discuss the next steps." "Sure," I agreed. "Be there at lunchtime." They showed up at 1 hour sharp. Boyd looked unaccustomedly serious and a little embarrassed. Apparently, the incident yesterday had made him think about his behavior. Gina, on the other hand, was focused and energetic, as if preparing for an important business meeting. I prepared a simple dinner, the roast that Sue Ellen had taught me to make in the early years of our marriage. At the table, we carefully avoided talking about yesterday, discussing the weather, Gina's work at the gallery, the latest city news. But I could see that my children were tense, and as soon as the meal was over, Gina got down to business. "Daddy, we want to apologize for yesterday," she began, casting a warning glance at Boyd. Especially Boyd. His actions were rash and impulsive. Boyd nodded, avoiding my gaze. "Yeah, Dad. I overreacted. Shouldn't have burned those papers, no matter what I thought of them." I looked at my kids, trying to see how sincere their apology was. Boyd looked genuinely ashamed, but I knew my son. His remorse usually lasted no longer than it took to get forgiveness. Gina, on the other hand, was reserved, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "Although what happened yesterday is hard to forget or undo." "We understand," Gina put in quickly, "and we want to do everything we can to make things right." I contacted a lawyer, and he said that without the original will, the inheritance process will follow standard procedure. Since there are no officially recognized children other than Boyd and me, the property will be divided between us. "Of course, that doesn't take away the moral aspect of it," she added hastily, noticing my frown. "If this Hope really exists and is really Mom's daughter, we might consider some sort of compensation. A small one, of course." "A little?" I repeated. What about the fact that your mother wanted to divide everything equally between the three of you?" Boyd snorted. "We don't even know if that's what she really wanted. Maybe it was something else entirely in those papers. Maybe she just wanted us to know that woman existed, nothing more." "And about the bank account in Pittsburgh?" I asked. "About the $100,000 she'd been saving for years specifically for Hope?" Gina and Boyd looked at each other. They'd obviously discussed that part of the conversation beforehand. "About the account," Gina began cautiously, "we thought it would be wise to see if it even existed, and if it does, perhaps to temporarily block access to it until we get the situation sorted out." I couldn't believe my ears. "You want to prevent your sister from getting the money your mother specifically set aside for her?" "She's not our sister," Boyd blurted out. "She's some stranger who showed up out of nowhere and wants a piece of the inheritance." I looked at my son, amazed at how easily he'd forgotten that he'd destroyed the documents that proved Hope's relationship to Swellen. "She didn't show up, Boyd. Your mother found her. They've been in touch for the last 3 years. And if you'd bothered to read the letter all the way through, instead of making a theatrical gesture with fire, you'd have found out about it." Boyd blushed, but didn't back down. "Whatever. She didn't grow up with us, didn't know Mama like we did. Why should she get anything?" "'Cause your mother wanted it that way," I answered, trying to stay calm. "And if you really love Sue Ellen, you would respect her wish, no matter how strange it seemed to you." Gina put her hand on Boyd's shoulder, as if to keep him from erupting again. "Dad, don't get us wrong. We just want to make sure everything's legit. That this Hope is really Mom's daughter and not some con artist who took advantage of a sick woman's gullibility." Your mother wasn't a gullible, sick woman," I cut her off. "She was sane until her last day. And if she recognized Hope as her daughter, then she was." I could see that my words weren't convincing them. They had already decided for themselves that Hope was a threat, a competitor claiming their inheritance. They weren't going to accept her, or even entertain the idea that their mother might have had a secret daughter born before they were born. "Well," I said, getting up from the table, "I see you've made up your minds. You can do as you see fit. But be warned, I'll act on your mother's last will to the best of my ability." Boyd tensed. "What do you mean, Dad?" "Son, I'm going to look for Hope," I answered firmly. "And if I do, I'll tell her everything I know, including how her brother and sister reacted to the news of her existence." Gina turned pale. "Dad, you can't." "I can," I interrupted her. "And I will. You both showed me today that you are only interested in money, Not in your mother's memory, not in her wishes, not in respecting her decisions? Well, I can't force you to be better than you are, but I can stay out of your scheming. Boyd jumped up from his chair, his face crimson with anger. You're taking this stranger's side against your own children? How can you do that? I'm taking the side of truth, Boyd, I answered quietly. And justice. That's what I've dedicated my life to as a prosecutor. And I'm not going to change my principles now, just because my own children turned out to be greedy and heartless. I saw how my words hit them. Gina flinched, and Boyd took a step back as if I'd physically pushed him. But I felt no satisfaction at their reaction, only a deep, overpowering sadness. How could the children that Sue Ellen and I had raised with so much love grow up to be so callous? I think you'd better leave, I said, pointing to the door. I need to think. They left almost immediately. Gina gave me one last look, a mixture of resentment and calculation, and Boyd didn't even turn around, slamming the front door loudly. I was alone in a house that suddenly seemed empty and alien, filled with the ghosts of unfulfilled hopes. That evening, as I sat in my office, rereading the surviving fragments of Sue Ellen's letter, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Vance Harding, I answered. Software me home. Good evening, Mr. Harding, said a woman's voice. My name is Veronica Palmer, and I'm your late wife Sue Lynn Harding's notary. I straightened in my chair. It was as if fate itself had decided to intervene in the situation. Good evening, Mrs. Palmer. What can I do for you? Actually, it is I who can help you, Mr. Harding, she said with calm confidence. I'm calling about your wife's will. Today is exactly 3 months after her death, and according to her instructions, I should contact you if you haven't contacted me before. I felt strangely relieved. So Sue Ellen had foreseen this. My hesitation, my reluctance to accept the truth, my unwillingness to contact the daughter I had only learned of after my wife's death. I'm listening, Mrs. Palmer. There is an unusual clause in your wife's will concerning one Hope Barnett, née Kinnaird. Mrs. Harding indicated that if you did not contact this woman within 3 months of her death, I should do so on her behalf. But she would prefer that the first contact be made by you. I sighed. Yes, I know about Hope. Sue Ellen left me a letter explaining, but something happened that complicated things. Hiram, what was it, if it's no secret? There was genuine concern in the notary's voice. I briefly told her about the incident with Boyd yesterday and the children's reaction to the news of Hope's existence. I understand, Mrs. Palmer said when I was finished. Your wife had anticipated the possibility of such a reaction from the younger children. That's why she made copies of all the documents and left them with me. We have all the necessary paperwork to prove Hope's parentage to Mrs. Harding, including DNA test results and a legally certified acknowledgement of maternity. I felt the tension I'd been carrying around for the past few days recede a little. Sue Ellen had thought of everything. She had protected Hope from Gina and Boyd's possible attempts to challenge her rights. As for the bank account in Pittsburgh, Mrs. Palmer continued, as if reading my mind, it's also completely set up. Sue Ellen had left clear instructions with the bank, and the money could be transferred to Hope at any time as soon as she presented the proper paperwork. Your children won't be able to stop it from happening. I allowed myself a weak smile. My Sue Ellen, always so practical and thoughtful. Thank you, Mrs. Palmer. It's a relief. You're welcome, Mr. Harding. I'm simply carrying out your wife's last wishes. But there's one more detail I need to tell you. What is it? I'm alerted. Mrs. Harding left a separate envelope with a personal message for you. She asked me to deliver it to you personally, not by post or courier. Could you come to my office tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? I've been thinking. Another message from Sue Ellen. Another secret? Or maybe an explanation for why she'd kept the truth about Hope from me for so long. Of course, I answered. I'll come by tomorrow morning, if that's convenient for you. That's fine. I'll see you at 10. We exchanged formal goodbyes, and I hung up the phone, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, I knew I was doing the right thing. I'll contact Hope, like Sue Ellen wanted me to. I'll give her the opportunity to learn more about the mother she never really got to know in her lifetime. As for Gina and Boyd, maybe in time they'll come to terms with Hope's existence. Maybe they'll even find the strength to accept her as a sister. But even if that doesn't happen, I will no longer turn a blind eye to their true nature. I loved them. They were my children, flesh of my flesh. But I couldn't respect the people they had become. I picked up the picture of Sue Ellen standing on my desk. She was smiling her soft, slightly enigmatic smile, as if she knew something the others didn't. I realized now that she did. You always saw right through them, didn't you? I whispered, running my finger along the glass. Saw things I refused to see. Forgive my blindness, my love. Tomorrow I will meet with the notary. I'll get one last message from Sue Ellen, and then I'll find the strength to call Hope and tell her that her mother loved her and never forgot her, even when circumstances separated them. That she wanted to right the wrongs of the past, at least in part, leaving her not only money but a chance to know her family, no matter how complicated and imperfect. I set the photo aside and closed my eyes, feeling the tears sting my eyelids. In spite of everything that had happened, in spite of my disappointment in my own children, I felt a strange peace in that moment. It was as if Suleen was beside me, encouraging and supporting me as she had always done in my lifetime. The phone call interrupted my musings again. It was Gina. Dad, she began without preamble, Boyd and I have been thinking about it, and we've decided we overreacted. Maybe you're right about this, Hope. Maybe we should at least meet her before we jump to conclusions. I might have been glad to hear her say that, if I hadn't heard the falseness in her voice. Gina hadn't changed her mind. She just realized that a frontal attack hadn't worked and was now trying to come at it from the other side. I'm glad to hear that, I replied neutrally, though you two had a very different attitude an hour ago. We talked, Gina said quickly. We realized that we'd really overreacted. It was a shock, you know, to find out that Mom had had a secret daughter all those years. I understand, I nodded, though she couldn't see it. What do you suggest now? We could look for this Hope together, the three of us, as a family. Family. The word sounded like mockery to Gina now. I'll think about it, I said evasively. I need time to think about it now. Of course, Dad, Gina's voice turned honeyed. We understand. Just know that we're with you. After I hung up the phone, I sat for a long time, thinking about my kids. About how easily they switched from rage to feigned concern when they realized brute force wasn't working. About how confidently they lied, thinking I couldn't see through them. Suellen was right. She had always been right about them. And now I understood why she'd kept the truth about Hope from them until the last moment. She wanted to protect her first daughter from the greed and selfishness of the younger children. Well, I'll continue her work. I'll meet with the notary tomorrow, and then I'll find Hope and tell her everything. The truth about her mother, about herself, about the family she never knew. And Gina and Boyd, they'll have to accept that some things can't be controlled. Even if it shatters their illusions about themselves and their rights. The morning was overcast. A light rain drummed on the roof of my old Ford as I parked outside a small office building in the business district of Batesville. I'd purposely pulled out a half hour ahead of schedule so I wouldn't accidentally run into Gina or Boyd. After yesterday's conversation, I had no doubt that they might decide to follow me to see what I was up to. Notary Veronica Palmer's office was located on the second floor. A modest sign on the door read, Veronica Palmer, Notary and Legal Services. I knocked and entered after hearing the invitation. The room appeared small but cozy. Bookcases with legal tomes, a few certificates on the walls, a dark wood desk. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 50s with neatly styled blonde hair and attentive gray eyes. Mr. Harding? She stood up, extending her hand. I'm Veronica Palmer. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I shook her hand, noting the firm, confident shake. Likewise, Mrs. Palmer. It's a shame, though, under the circumstances. She nodded understandingly. Please sit down. May I offer you some coffee? I'd love to, I agreed, settling into the chair across from her desk. While she prepared coffee in a small coffee maker on a side table, I looked around the office. On the wall hung a photograph. Mrs. Palmer, about 10 years younger, next to a man in a military uniform. Probably her husband. There were other photos, including several of her standing next to various people, apparently clients. Had you known my wife for a long time? I asked when Mrs. Palmer returned with 2 cups of steaming coffee. She sat down at the table and twirled the cup in her hands thoughtfully. About 13 years. First as a client, then as a friend. Suellen was a special woman. Yes, I agreed. Special, and as it turned out, with special secrets. Mrs. Palmer looked at me carefully. She was afraid you wouldn't understand, and at the same time she was tormented by the fact that she couldn't tell you the truth. I would have understood, I objected. I've never given you reason to think otherwise. Sometimes our greatest fears have no rational explanation, she said softly, especially when it comes to the ones we love the most. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring its strong, tart flavor. Mrs. Palmer certainly knew a thing or two about good coffee. You said you had something for me. She nodded and opened a desk drawer, pulling out an envelope very much like the one Sue Ellen had left me. The same heavy cream paper, the same neat handwriting writing out my name. Saku, your wife left this with me 2 years ago, Mrs. Palmer said, holding it out to me, with instructions to give it to you personally 3 months after her death, unless you contact me sooner. I took the envelope, feeling its heaviness. There was something else inside besides the paper. What is it? I don't know, the notary answered honestly. I haven't opened it. It's between you and your wife. I ran my finger over my name, written in familiar handwriting. What else did Sue Ellen want to tell me? What other secrets had she kept all these years? In addition to this personal message, Mrs. Palmer continued, pulling a folder from the same drawer, I have a copy of your wife's official will. I assume you are already familiar with its contents? I nodded. In general terms, Sue Ellen left equal shares to our children, including Hope, and a separate account in Pittsburgh for her. Right, Mrs. Palmer opened the folder. But there are some details I need to discuss with you, specifically about the Pittsburgh account and how your wife set it up. She pulled out several documents and spread them out in front of me. Bank statements, investment statements, insurance policies. You see, Mr. Harding, this account has been in existence for 27 years. Your wife opened it shortly after Boyd was born, under a separate name, Sue Ellen Kinnaird, using her maiden name. Kinnaird? I raised my eyebrows in surprise. But Sue Ellen's maiden name was Morton. Mrs. Palmer shook her head. No, Mr. Harding. Morton was the last name of her adoptive parents in Ohio, the ones she told you about. But according to the birth certificate, your wife's real last name was Kinnaird. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. Another hoax, another lie. How many were there? Go on, I said, trying to remain calm. The down payment was small, only $3,000, from an inheritance left by her aunt. Then over the years, Suleen had funded the account regularly. Small amounts so as not to attract attention. Bookkeeping jobs, custom sewing, selling her baked goods to neighbors. All that money went into Hope's account. I remembered how Suleen sometimes took on extra work, saying she was bored staying home now that the kids were grown. How she got into sewing and baking, claiming it was just a hobby. And in reality, beside, Mrs. Palmer continued, she turned out to be a very successful investor. With the help of a financial advisor, she invested some of her money in stocks, mostly technology companies and medical startups. Some of these investments have yielded significant returns. She showed me a graph of account growth over the last 10 years. The curve had been steadily climbing upward, especially sharply in the last 5 years. At Washington, there is currently $123,642.17 in Hope Kinnaird's account, Mrs. Palmer concluded, plus the interest accrued since the last settlement. I sat stunned by this information. Sue Ellen, my quiet, homely Sue Ellen, had secretly amassed a fortune for a daughter I didn't even know existed. She'd worked for years, saved, invested all for Hope. Why didn't she tell me? It just slipped out. I would have understood. I would have helped. Mrs. Palmer smiled softly. I think it was her way of redeeming herself. Something she had to do on her own, without help or approval. A kind of penance. I shook my head, still unable to fully comprehend the magnitude of what I had learned. Son. And now about how that money will be transferred to Hope, the notary continued. According to your wife's instructions, I should contact Hope Barnett, notify her of the inheritance, and arrange for the transfer of the funds. But Sue Ellen would have preferred that the first contact be made by you. She thought it was important that you tell Hope personally about her mother, about your life together, about the kind of person Sue Ellen was. I looked at the envelope I was still holding. What was inside? Another confession? Another secret? I'll contact her, I said firmly. But first I want to read what's in here. Of course, Mrs. Palmer nodded. Take your time. We still have time. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were several sheets of paper and a small velvet box. I put the box aside and unfolded the letter. My dear Vance, it began. If you are reading this letter, it means that my first message didn't scare you off and you decided to find out the whole truth. I'm grateful for that, for not turning your back on me, even after finding out about my lies and secrets. I took a deep breath, trying to deal with the lump in my throat. Even after her death, Sue Ellen continued to amaze me with her insight. In the first letter, I told you about hope, about my youth, about the mistakes that led to me losing my first daughter. But there's something else you need to know. Something I've kept hidden even from Veronica, who has become my confidant in this case. I looked warily at the notary, but she calmly drank her coffee, giving me time and space to read. She really didn't know what was in the letter. Robert Kinnaird, Hope's father, was not a casual acquaintance, as I wrote to you. He was my half-brother, my father's son from his first marriage. I felt the blood drain from my face. God, what a nightmare Sue Ellen had been through. Don't judge him too harshly, Vance. We hardly knew each other as kids. He grew up with his mother in another state and showed up at our house when I was 16 and he was 31. My father had brought him back when things got really bad, hoping to use his connections for another scam. Robert didn't know what he was getting into. He was kind to me, the only one in that cold, cruel house. That one kindness turned into affection, affection into something more. We were both lonely, both seeking solace. I'm not justifying what happened, just trying to explain. I turned the page, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Poor Sue Ellen. What hell she'd been through. When I got pregnant, Robert was scared. He was already married with 2 children. Though his marriage was falling apart, the news of a child with his half-sister could ruin his life completely. He offered money for an abortion and disappeared. I didn't blame him. I was horrified by what had happened between us. But I couldn't get rid of the baby. I ran away from home, as far away as I could, so that no one could connect me to the Kinnaird family. I made up a new story, a new past. So there was a modest Sue Ellen Morton from Ohio, a girl from a good family, without dark secrets and skeletons in the closet. That's the girl I introduced myself to you when we met. I set the letter aside and took a sip of my cooled coffee, trying to digest what I had read. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. Why Sue Ellen never wanted to talk about her family, why she refused to visit her relatives, why she was so nervous when I offered to track down her parents or brother. I know what you're thinking right now, Vance, that I've been deceiving you our entire life together. And it's true, I started by lying and kept lying for fear of losing you, our family, our home. That was my greatest fear, that one day you would find out who I really was and turn away from me in disgust. But there was another reason I kept quiet. I was afraid that the truth about my background would hurt your career. Imagine headlines like, DA's wife is the daughter of a notorious crook. Or worse, if the Robert story came out. I couldn't risk your reputation like that. I closed my eyes, feeling a lump rise to my throat. Sue Ellen had spent her whole life afraid that her past would hurt me, my career, and I hadn't even realized the weight she carried within her. When I found out about my heart condition 5 years ago, I knew I had to somehow right at least some of my wrongs. I started looking for hope through a private investigator, very careful not to get your attention. It took almost 2 years, but I found her. She grew up to be a wonderful person, Vance. A doctor, just like you always dreamed Gina would be. Married to a good man, raising 2 boys. We started corresponding. Formal at first, then more and more open. She didn't hold it against me, though she had every right to. Said she always felt that somewhere there was her real mother thinking about her. And last year we met in person. On that trip to Chicago, remember? 5 days that were simultaneously the happiest and most bitter days of my life. I remembered that trip. Sue Ellen came back from that trip looking 10 years younger, with an inner light in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. At the time, I had written it off as a vacation, a change of scenery. Now I realized she was finally reunited with the daughter she'd lost years ago. I've been meaning to tell you about everything, Vance. About Hope, about my past, about everything. Hope really wanted to meet you. But then this attack happened, and the doctors said I might not survive the next one. I was afraid I wouldn't have time to explain everything, that I'd leave you with unanswered questions, with a mystery you might never solve. So I wrote these letters, one to you and one to Veronica, with instructions. In the little box you'll find in the envelope is a locket I wore when I was young. Inside is a picture of me when I was 18 and a lock of my hair. I want you to give it to Hope. It's the only thing that connects her to the girl who was her mother before I became your wife. If you decide to reach out to her, Vance, know that I don't expect you two to be family. I know how hard it is to accept a stranger into your life, but I hope you'll at least listen to her, tell her a little bit about me, about the woman I've become after all my mistakes and downfalls. I wish Hope could recognize that part of me too. As for Gina and Boyd, I know they're not going to be happy to hear about their big sister, especially when they find out about the money I've been saving for her. They've always been a little greedy, our kids, always thinking they deserve more than they get. I love them with all my heart, but I see their flaws. Please protect Hope from their possible hostility. She doesn't deserve another disappointment in her life. I have loved you every day of our lives, Vance. Despite the lies, despite the secrets, my love for you has always been genuine and complete. You gave me a home, a family, security, everything I could have ever dreamed of in my untamed youth. For this I will be eternally grateful to you. Forgive me for all my deceptions, and remember me if you can, not as the frightened little girl who once made a terrible mistake, but as the woman I became by your side, because of you. Always yours, Sue Ellen. I slowly folded the letter, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. How much pain, how much fear my wife had carried inside her all these years, and how courageously she tried to right her wrongs at the end of her life. Mrs. Palmer delicately handed me a box of tissues but said nothing, giving me time to recover. I opened the velvet box. Inside was an antique silver locket on a thin chain. I opened it carefully. On one side was a small photograph, a young Sue Ellen with long blonde hair and serious eyes. On the other was a neatly curled lock of hair tied with a thin ribbon. She was always so thoughtful, I said finally, closing the locket. She thought of everything, foresaw everything. Yes, Mrs. Palmer agreed. Sulan never left anything to chance, especially when it came to the people she loved. I looked at the photograph of Hope that Mrs. Palmer had placed in front of me with the papers, a middle-aged woman with brown hair and eyes so similar to Sue Ellen's. My, stepdaughter? How can I even think about her? What is she to me? Will you contact her? Mrs. Palmer asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Then I cleared my throat and said, yes. Tonight, I think. I don't see any point in putting it off. She's a good woman, said the notary. I spoke to her several times on the phone when Swellen was organizing their meeting. Very polite, reasonable. She doesn't expect anything from you or her half-brother and sister. All she wanted was to get to know her mother. And now she'll have to learn about her through me. I smiled sadly. It's ironic. Sometimes we get to know people better through those who love them, Mrs. Palmer said philosophically. You knew Sue Ellen differently than she saw herself. Perhaps your account of her will be even more honest than her own. I have collected all the documents the notary laid out before me and returned them to her. Can I make copies? For Hope, so she knows how much her mother has cared for her over the years. Of course, Mrs. Palmer nodded. Certainly, I'll prepare a complete packet of documents, and when you're ready, we'll arrange the transfer of funds. Everything is already prepared. I thanked her and stood up, feeling a strange relief mixed with the weight of new knowledge. I now knew the whole truth about Sue Ellen, about her past. And though it was a bitter truth, I was grateful for her trust, for the fact that she had not taken her secrets to the grave, but had found the courage to reveal them to me, even after her death. You know, I said, standing in the doorway, sometimes I used to think I could see a kind of underlying sadness in Sue Ellen, especially on the birthdays of our children. Now I understand why. She must have been thinking about Hope, about missing her birthdays, her first steps, her graduation. But she found her at the end, Mrs. Palmer reminded me gently. And as far as I can tell, that encounter brought her real healing. She came back from it a different person, more whole, more at peace. I nodded, remembering how Sue Ellen had changed since that trip to Chicago. It was as if the heaviness she'd been carrying around for decades had suddenly disappeared, allowing her to breathe fully. Now I understood why. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Palmer," I said sincerely, "for being her friend, her confidant. I'm sure it meant a lot to her." "It was an honor," she replied simply. "Sulin was a wonderful woman. I'm glad I was able to help her fulfill her last wish." I walked out of the notary's office and got into my car, clutching the envelope with the letter and the locket tightly in my hand. The rain had stopped, and the sun was peeking through the breaks in the clouds. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Mrs. Palmer had written down for me on a piece of paper. 3 long beeps, and then a woman's voice that sounded remarkably like Sue Ellen's. "Hello?" I took a deep breath. "Hope. My name is Vance Harding. I was your mother's husband, Sue Ellen." I didn't put off meeting Hope. After a phone conversation in which she agreed to meet with me in a quiet voice remarkably similar to Sue Ellen's, I bought a plane ticket to Boston the next morning. I didn't say anything to the kids. I just sent a quick text to say I was leaving for a few days on business related to Sue Ellen's will. Hope's house turned out to be a cozy 2-story mansion in a quiet neighborhood, with a manicured garden and a porch swing. I rang the doorbell, feeling my heart pounding. A middle-aged woman stood on the doorstep, with brown hair pulled back into a simple ponytail and eyes that looked remarkably like my late wife's. The same gray-blue irises, the same attentive, deep gaze. "Mr. Harding?" she said, and again that voice, so similar to my wife's, only a little lower and with a slight Boston accent. "Vance, please." I held out my hand. "And you must be Hope." She invited me into the spacious living room and offered me tea. The room was bright and cozy, with pictures on the walls. Hope with a man who must be her husband, 2 teenage boys, family snapshots. "Troy, I brought you something." I pulled a velvet box with a locket from my inside jacket pocket. "Solon wanted you to have it." Hope took the box carefully and opened it. Her eyes widened when she saw the locket. "It's her locket from her youth," I explained. "Inside is a picture of her and a lock of her hair." Hope opened the locket and stared at the picture of young Sue Ellen for a long time. A tear rolled down her cheek. "Sorry, she was so beautiful," she whispered. "Just a girl." "She was 18 when you were born," I said softly. "Scared, alone, unsupported." "I never blamed her for giving me up," Hope replied. "When we met last year, I told her that. I told her about the inheritance, about how Sue Ellen had been saving money specifically for her for years. Son, I don't want her money," Hope shook her head. "That's not why I was looking for her." "I know," I nodded, "but it was important to her, a way to redeem herself, to make up for the years of separation. Please accept this inheritance, not for your own sake, but for hers." We talked for hours. I talked about Sue Ellen, our life together, her habits, the books she loved. Hope listened attentively, sometimes asking questions, sometimes sharing her impressions of seeing her mother. "What about your children?" she asked at one point. "Do they know about me?" I sighed, feeling the heaviness return. They do, but their reactions left a lot to be desired. I spoke briefly about Gina and Boyd's reaction to the news of Hope's existence, the burned documents, and the attempts to block access to the inheritance. "Somi, I understand them," Hope said quietly. "It must be a shock to find out that your mother had a secret daughter that no one knew about." "That doesn't excuse their behavior," I objected. "They're adults, and they're acting like spoiled children." Hope looked thoughtfully out the window. "I never wanted to disturb your family," she said finally. "When I started looking for my birth mother, I just wanted to find out who I was, where I came from, to fill the void that has always been a part of my life." At that moment, 2 teenagers, boys about 14 or 15 years old, entered the house. "Mom, we're home!" shouted one of them, and then he noticed me and stopped talking. "Hi, boys," Hope smiled at them. "This is Mr. Harding from Batesville. He's my birth mother's husband." The boys politely introduced themselves, Ethan and Lucas. I stared at these boys, Sue Ellen's grandchildren, whose existence she had only learned of a year before she died. Hope invited me to stay for dinner, and soon her husband Nathan returned, a tall, solidly built man with a good-natured face and premature gray hair. The dinner was warm, almost family-like. The boys asked me about Batesville, about my work as a prosecutor. After dinner, when the boys had gone to do their homework, Hope and I went out on the back porch. "You have a beautiful family," I said sincerely. "Suline would be happy to know that you're doing well." "She knew," Hope replied quietly. "When we met, I showed her the pictures, told her about my husband and the boys. She cried when she looked at the pictures of her grandchildren. I will fulfill Sue Ellen's last will and testament," I said firmly. You'll get your share of the inheritance despite Gina and Boyd's resistance." "I don't want to be the cause of discord in your family," Hope replied. "If it causes too much trouble, I can give up the inheritance." I shook my head. "No, it's Sue Ellen's money, and she wanted you to have it." "Don't judge your children too harshly," Hope said softly. "Surreconitorum, maybe their reaction is just shock, fear of the unknown." I looked at that woman, so wise and generous, and thought that Sue Ellen would be proud of the way her first daughter had grown up. "Maybe you're right," I replied without much conviction. "But whatever their reaction, I want you and I to stay in touch." "I don't mind at all," Hope smiled. "And maybe someday I'll get to meet your children too, when they're ready." Before I left, I gave Hope the picture of Sue Ellen that I always carried in my wallet, the one taken on our 40th wedding anniversary. "Thank you," Hope took the picture carefully. "I'll put it next to the picture of my adoptive parents, so the boys will know both of their grandmothers." On the plane ride back to Batesville, I thought about the day, and I realized that real family wasn't just blood, or a common last name, or years of living under the same roof. A real family is honesty, respect, and the ability to accept the other person with all their mistakes and secrets. Something that was sorely lacking in my relationship with my own children. I didn't know how our relationship would play out next. Whether Gina and Boyd would ever be able to accept Hope's existence, it would be their choice, their decision, and my decision was already made. I would fulfill Sue Ellen's last will and testament, give Hope her inheritance, tell her everything I know about her mother, let her be a part of my life, because it's the right thing to do. Because in the end, the most important thing in a family is not blood, but love, honesty, and mutual respect.